right, so today we have my good friend Evangelos Simoudis, Managing Director at Synapse Partners. So their tagline is we help corporations to apply AI and we invest in startups developing applications that exploit data using AI. So Evangelos, welcome back to the podcast.
Man, always good to be here and always a pleasure to talk with you.
All right, so today we'll have what I hope will be a regular check-in with Evangelos because he's in a good position because he talks to actual corporations and enterprises, but he also has his pulse on the startup ecosystem. So he's kind of navigating back and forth. And so, as I was telling him before we started recording, we're both bullish on AI in general, but what we hope to do on a regular basis is kind of give you folks an idea of what we're hearing from users, builders, and enterprises. So with that, let me start, Evangelos, by talking about all these pilots that are happening, right? So every startup that you talk to, obviously we're talking to founders, so they tend to be a bit of the cheerleader type and optimistic, but a lot of pilots. But based on the companies you're deeply engaged in, so I guess this is a hard question, but I guess very roughly speaking, what percentage of these Gen AI and Agentic-AI projects actually move beyond POCs into something more serious?
Okay. So first of all, just for your audience to get an idea of how we get our data and what I'm going to be talking about is we deal with four types of data. We deal with data that is provided to us by our portfolio companies, because all of them are AI-related companies, so they have enterprise clients that they work with. The second piece of data is the data from our own corporate engagement. So Synapse Partners has an advisory arm, so we advise large corporations on AI. And then because of one and two, we interact with two other constituencies. We interact with a lot of investment bank analysts who track public companies and private sometimes, as well as industry analysts who are also tracking both private and public companies. So when we look at what is the state of the market, we try to coalesce, in a sense, these four types of data. So what I will say is, since the summer of 24 to today, we continue to see a growing interest on anything relating to AI. But anything relating to AI doesn't mean necessarily generative AI. It means, what I call discriminative AI, which tends to be, other people call it traditional AI, but it's again the application of machine learning on a variety of problems. And I will say that is doing very, very well. A lot of the people who may have been experimenting now all of a sudden see projects moving along and having budgets, even more significant budgets, allocated to that. On the generative AI, there is a lot of experimentation, but that's where I see not as much movement from POCs, prototypes, experiments to deployed system. Now some of the data that we have, including the data that we directly touch, gives us the impression that by the end of the year there will be quite a few of those projects moving from experimentation or POC to some stage of deployment. But I think that if we want to talk about broad adoption of generative AI, I think we're still in the hype stage as opposed to reality of experimenting and then moving it to deployment. And if you were to talk about agentic systems, then I think we're even further behind of moving to deployment. I think.
What's the state of piloting for agentic systems? Are you seeing a lot of pilots?
Actually, I'm seeing a lot less pilots. I think right now the enterprise is facing, with regards to AI, to generative AI, just to be more precise, is facing a similar problem that they are facing with cybersecurity systems. Meaning, there are so many systems that are presented to the CIO, the chief AI officer, the business unit executive, that they only have so much bandwidth for things to try out, right? And they have obviously their own internal groups that are building some things internally, as well as they have the offerings from the third parties that want the enterprises to test them. And so I think we're getting a little bit of a bottleneck there on how much they can experiment.
I can attest to this as someone who walks the expo hall of the RSA conference every year. It is so confusing. So many products and companies to describe themselves in a similar way. I can imagine the same thing happening in AI. So, in terms of the generative AI projects that you are hearing about that are converting from pilot POC to production, are there specific business functions or specific verticals where this is happening more often than others?
Yeah, so I would say that, and again, this is not different from what has already been being reported, but we see three major use cases going head and shoulders above everything else. One is customer support, various types of customer support, and how generative AI can contribute to that. The second one is automating various programming functions from the actual software production to testing and the third one is I call it broadly intelligent documents. How can I take various documents but through the use of generative AI, I can automate the filling of those documents if it is form filling, or conversely, the extraction of data from those documents. And we see a lot of efforts in those three areas, both by private companies that are trying to introduce solutions, but also within the corporation, efforts that use new or existing tooling to accomplish one of these three use cases. But by far, we see these three as being the most prominent today.
So we're both in Silicon Valley. So I think our conversations skew towards either A, startups, or B, digital native companies, right? So these are the companies that we tend to encounter and talk to. And in my mind, neither one of those are, I mean, they may use AI, but they're unlikely they may want to build their own. So if you're a startup, it's not a very productive market. You get a lot of pilots, but not a lot of really high paying customers there. So based on your...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Our customers, just to set the record straight, our corporate customers come from not only around the US, but also internationally as well. So we obviously, the same thing with our startups. We have startups that are US based, but we also have startups in Europe, and we have startups in Israel that we have invested in and get data from there.
So you described the business functions where you're seeing a lot, some initial movement into production for generative AI. And I know you work a lot with the, I guess, the mobility and transportation vertical, right? So So I'm assuming some of this production work is in that industry. So can you share which industries you're hearing are more likely, or I guess starting to move into production with generative AI?
Automotive is not one of them. Let's start with that.
And why is that?
I think they have a lot of other issues to work with. I mean, I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, I was with the chief strategy officer of a foreign automaker. He said to me, top of mind right now is how the tariffs are going to be, how the issue of the tariffs is going to be resolved. They have, we talk a lot about customer experience. They have an effort there that we are advising them on. But other AI efforts are going in the back burner because, as I said, it's a mud. I mean, they have as he put it, they have a number of ships full of vehicles on the way to the U.S. They're trying to determine how the tariffs are going to work out and what's going to be the ultimate pricing of these vehicles. They don't want to think. We see financial services, frankly, and also technology-driven. So financial services. If I look at companies like Intuit or Visa, I don't know if you will put them into financial services or
of course,
some other sector, but again, they touch a lot of financial services. So if you look at investment banking, companies like J.P. Morgan or Morgan Stanley. They tend to be. I mean, a lot of the use cases that we see there are quite interesting. They are much larger size. I mean, so if you look at in the case of Intuit, they are applying generative AI for customer support. They're seeing significant improvements, both in terms of the customer satisfaction, but also productivity improvements. They're applying it in programming. They're seeing significant, maybe 4 or 5 times developer productivity using these copilots, right? Similarly, in J.P. Morgan and Morgan Stanley, in their private client divisions, they see the productivity of their associates improving significantly as they prepare for a client meeting, so they can pull together a lot more research and go through it a lot faster through the summarization capabilities and connectivity capabilities that these systems, the generative AI systems have. So there we see deployed cases actually, right? I mean, so these companies report that they have now these systems in the front lines. Similarly, if you look at companies like ServiceNow, again, technology-oriented enterprise application provider, they're having great success, which translates to financial success for them because of how they use generative AI to address customer support in the IT segment, right? That's what ServiceNow is doing. I mean, in particular, ServiceNow has reported over $10 million worth of revenue generation just attributed directly to AI. They are improving, again, ServiceNow, they are reporting improvement in how many problem tickets they can go through on a particular unit of time, whatever per day or per hour, by using the kind of system. So again, my point is that we are seeing in companies with certain characteristics, and I can talk about if you want what these characteristics are, in my opinion at least, systems that have moved from experimentation to production, and not only they have moved to production, but they are generating real results, the kind of results that CFOs like to see in order to continue funding these efforts.
I guess now that you mentioned it, I'm intrigued. So maybe very briefly describe the top 2 to 3 attributes of these companies that are able to move from prototype to production.
Yeah. So the first, I would say, these companies are experimenters for a number of years. I mean, so this is not like jumping into AI the last 3 months and now they have moved into for experimentation to production. And moreover, this experimentation is associated with the corresponding significant funding. We have 2 of our firm's advisors come from Intuit. And I can tell you, because we have worked with the firm ourselves, also advising them, they're getting the right resources, both human resources, financial resources, over an extended period of time. So that's characteristic number one. The second thing is that these companies have been early adopters of the technology, and they are able to see how the technology has evolved. So if you talk to the folks at ServiceNow, you hear how they have been monitoring the evolution of LLMs, right? And they don't only focus on one LLM. They try to decide, do I use off the shelf? Do I use closed? Do I use open? Which version do I use? How does this version how does this version differ from the previous version? So this is the second thing, and they have the people who can do that. This is not reading reports, but this is having the right people who can make that assessment.
And then they have the people who can do the post training, which might involve fine tuning, right?
We can get to that in a minute if you want. But the third characteristic, which may be actually the most expensive, if you will, and which, in my opinion, inhibits many companies from moving from experimentation to production, is that these companies are willing to change their business processes in order to either incorporate AI, be it discriminative or generative, into an existing business process, or many times throw the existing business process out the window and start with an AI first process. And if you were to generalize this last statement, I think the biggest inhibitor to the move from experimentation to production to deployment is exactly the willingness and the cost of changing the business process.
Can you give a concrete example of something like that, where you saw?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at customer support, right? Customer support has a specific. If you look at an all-human customer support, they have an explicit process of how they move from level 1 to level 2 to beyond, right? What needs to happen. And so now if you're introducing generative AI, you have to decide, is my first line of support going to be AI only, or some combination of AI and human? But the human now is becoming much more informed because they have access to that AI system. And it was interesting. I mean, again, the best example of what can go wrong, depending on how you modify your business process, is what has gone through with Klarna. So Klarna, financial services company out of Sweden, initially they said, we're going to use AI only in order to do customer support. And then they came to realize, with some problems, by the way, and that's why they realized that this does not work even when the answers are correct. There is something about the customer experience that their customers did not find acceptable, let's call it. Good or bad, it does not acceptable. So they had to modify things, right? They had to go back and reorganize things. So to me, this is good for them, by the way. I mean, good for them in both cases, because on one, they said, we're going to change the business process completely to make it AI first, And then when this thing did not work very well, they were willing again to change the business process, say, okay, we're going to introduce some of the human element, maybe not to the same extent that we had in the before picture, right, when it was all human, but it will not, we're not going to be as dramatic as what we thought it would be, we would be able to do. So again, and when I talk to, and I see it Intuit, when I see it ServiceNow, again, we see this type of characteristic of how they are, I mean, in the case of Intuit, how do they do software development? How do they support the CPAs that are clients of theirs in dealing with new with the new tax laws, right? So again, these are changes that these corporations are willing to make in order to take advantage of generative AI, and I think that puts them on the forefront.
So, Evangelos, what about, so one of the things that I've noticed is that people underestimate the need to make changes to whatever data strategy or data platform that they have, right? Because some people have this mistaken notion, this thing is so powerful, I can just point it to what I already have, and I don't need to, I don't need to change my data strategy.
Yeah, this is a very, very appropriate observation, and unfortunately, we see it one too many times. Meaning, um, as we've seen over the last 30, 40 years that I've been involved in AI, and every time that you're trying to apply a new technique, whether it is just pure business intelligence with some reporting or some simple predictive models, you have to do more things to your data. And when we talk to chief AI officers, when we talk to business unit executives, one of the areas where we see most pushback is when we come and say, well, look, you have your data, but if you want to apply generative AI to do X, and we'll come to the X, then here's what you need to do to your data. And they will say, well, wait a minute, I just spent so much money to reconfigure my data, to clean my data, to label my data. Now you're telling me that I need to do more things. Communicating that point and making them appreciate the necessity of going through this is actually one of the critical points and one of the critical factors for success. And you said something before, which again I don't think is well appreciated, meaning a lot of people want to apply, a lot of corporations will talk about applying generative AI, but it's not clear to them initially what they want to do. Do you want to do RAG using an off-the-shelf closed model? Do you want to take an open weights, open source model and fine-tune it? Do you want to build? Do you need to build your own LLM? Maybe it's not LLM. Maybe it's an SLM, right? But that would each of these types, each of these strategies have the associated data strategy. And data strategy means not only you need the appropriate type of data, but you need to do the appropriate pre-processing to that data. That is something that is not well appreciated, and as it has typically happened throughout the decades of AI, this is not very well communicated, I feel, by the vendors to their clients. So there's still a lot of confusion, in other words.
So let me take this one issue at a time. The first one is open weights versus proprietary. I suppose it depends on what you're trying to do, and and also, I guess there's all sorts of considerations around cost, latency, and the talent that you have, right? So do you have the talent to fine tune or host this on your own, and so on and so forth. So let's set that aside. One question that I wanted to ask you is, now that the open weights models are beginning to, let's say, quote unquote, catch up a little bit, especially with the rise of DeepSeek's models that are pretty good at at reasoning, right? So, and maybe I still think that the proprietary models overall are probably better, but close enough. And I think actually, as you alluded to, the right strategy is always to architect your application so you can be model agnostic or maybe even use multiple models, right? Um, so the Chinese models, um, I've I had a conversation last week and the week before where it's an enterprise and they're a little nervous about deploying the Chinese models. I don't actually know why. I think part of it is just, it's from China. And even though we deploy it on-prem, you know, we want to make sure, right? So one security person at one of these companies basically told me, "Hey Ben, just because it's free, right? So would you just take anything from GitHub and run it on your laptop, right?" So what are you hearing in terms of the Chinese models? I think people understand now that they're getting to be good and on par. And while there's also these open weights models for Meta that are also good, but the cadence of release of the DeepSeek models is more frequent than the Meta model. So
Yeah.
you're more likely to have a DeepSeek model that's pretty good and pretty fast and so on and so forth. So what's your sense of hesitation around the Chinese models?
Again, I would bump it up a level, maybe a couple of levels. There is significant confusion of what models do we need. Forgetting about the provenance of the model.
Origin, yeah.
I think there is significant confusion of what models do I need. And do I need a single model or do I need multiple models for my application? Do I need, how much fine-tuning do I need to do? And how much
do I need the largest model? Maybe I can get by with a small model.
Exactly. And do I need a reasoning model or do I need so this and frankly, given the pace at which new models are presented to the market and are released, this has confused the intended users even more. Because remember, a lot of times what is happening, again, if I were to look at, we've been talking about adoption, but if I look at how things come in the enterprise, so a lot of times it starts with the casual use of an enterprise employee at home of certain things, right? Whether it is ChatGPT or Gemini or DeepSeek or whatever. And then that initial interaction starts to spill into interactions relating to the person's work, right? And in fact, this is the biggest fear that we hear about.
Bring your own AI. Yeah.
Is this shadow IT, right? Having doing something with corporate data without being sanctioned by the IT organization, and then finally you have everything that is sanctioned by the enterprise itself. So if you were to combine that adoption flow with the fact that you have a lot of different models of different types and different origins, that makes the problem really, really difficult and bad. And I actually believe that ultimately it is hurting the adoption of AI rather than helping it. When DeepSeek came out, burst into the scene, as I say, for about 3 weeks, I was on a constant call, I will call it, with different corporations that wanted to understand what should they think of this, right? Should they use it? How credible it is for the things that they want to do? Is it good enough? Is it adequate? Is it inadequate? Whatever. And I think that again,
provenance doesn't enter into the conversation.
Well, I think that provenance came in, but to them it was just another model that they have to consider in the very long list of models that are already present in the market, right? And there you have to, before even the provenance, I think the costs and the risks not because of the origin of the model, but risk because what it means to cybersecurity, to liability, to personal data or privacy, right? Those are the risks that corporations are starting to worry a lot about when they think about generative AI. And then, as I said, on top of that, then you have to put the origin of the models, right? And again, DeepSeek is one, but now you talk about Alibaba has really nice models, and Baidu has good models, and all of that. Yeah.
So I mean, so the enterprise and corporations you talk to, right? So presumably a lot of them are on the cloud. If you're on the cloud, let's say you're on Google Cloud, on Vertex, there's all sorts of Google models, and you're already familiar with Google, and Google has multiple models. I actually haven't looked. Maybe they even host some of the open weights models. They themselves have open weights models called Gemma.
Yeah.
So if you're a corporation, maybe you just tell yourself, maybe I'm overthinking this. I'm already on Google Cloud. I'll just use one of these. If Google allows me to fine tune, great. So then I don't, and then I trust that Google will just keep up on a regular cadence, whatever new development.
Yeah.
If the models start becoming multimodal and, in fact, Google's models are visual language models, right? So is that the easiest path for these corporations?
Okay, so you're bringing a couple of very important points. So let me tease it out a little bit. So first of all, how do corporations think about where to get their generative AI from? And Hyperscalers is, today at least, is their first go-to place.
Yeah.
Okay, that is followed by application companies. Again, we mentioned ServiceNow. Obviously, Salesforce has its own agentic framework, whatever they call it. So that's the second.
Let's not forget Databricks.
Databricks, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You have then the pure plays, be it large pure plays like OpenAI or Claude or Anthropic, or rather, or smaller pure plays. And then you have management consulting firms like Accenture or IBM or KPMG and others. So these are the 4 or 5 providers, if you will, that are helpers that the enterprise has. Then you talk about, okay, do I need to have a best of breed, or do I need an all-in-one type of solution? And I think, again, the hyperscalers, particularly Microsoft with Azure, Google, they're making, I feel, based on what we're seeing from our own clients, very strong inroads in terms of offering kind of like the one-stop solution. Where it could now, switching for a minute to again a risk detection.
So the startups listening to this are getting a bit discouraged. So you might want to throw them a bone.
Look, the fact is that even for our own startups, I say this, that they need to find ways to differentiate themselves. There's a lot of sameness out there, and wherever there is sameness, the corporation will go to the least risky player, right? So provider. So I think that that's the best I can say, because we live through it through our own portfolio. But what I was going to say is that going back to the risk issue, and this is maybe a good opportunity for startups. We're seeing a very strong interest in ML-Ops and LLM-Ops need. And especially in our case, we think of it as a continuum between data ops, model ops, which includes ML ops and LLM ops, and then DevOps, right? And I think that the hyperscalers do not have the strongest of solutions for a problem that, if you want to think about how I go from experimentation to production, dealing with these risk problems is a very critical issue.
So would you say this lack of tooling around ops is one of the reasons why people are not going to production?
I would say particularly LLM-Ops, and how you can combine ML ops and LLM ops, because again, as I said before, when we were starting this conversation, the discriminative AI is going off the chart because there is so much demand, and for those people, a lot of organizations may have even a rudimentary ML ops process in place. Now you need to add the LLM ops and do that at scale. And how you bring these processes together is a good opportunity for somebody to crack, because we do not think that the hyperscalers have that one-stop solution.
There's actually so one of the startups I advise is called Luminous AI. So they're building an I guess kind of an AI alignment platform or a decision engine for managing AI risks. And one of the insights there is in this iteration of AI, there's actually it's really cross-functional, like unlike previous waves of AI, right? So because it's much more accessible. So it's not just developers, there's product people, and now of course lawyers, right? So, but the problem is there's no single place where these people can collaborate, where the lawyers can work with the product and technical teams to make sure that everything is good to go and can be certified to be deployed. And so when you're talking about LLM ops, I would say yes, definitely. And one of the reasons this is the case is because this generation of AI is so much more accessible that whatever ML ops tools you had before might not be accessible enough.
I agree with you, and in fact, this is something. Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned the automotive industry, and this is something that we have been saying to the automotive industry, that which translates now to AI as well, which is, as you're thinking about your new products, be it autonomous vehicles, software-defined vehicles, you really need to break down your silos of engineering, design, testing, and bring everybody under one roof. This is something that newcomer automakers like Rivian, like Tesla have done very successfully, and they have seen the rewards of this breaking of silos, right? And I think particularly with generative AI, going from data ops, you were talking earlier about the problems with data, but data ops to DevOps and strategy on one end, even before you get into the ops, and on the other hand, marketing and sales and deployment, bringing everybody under one roof is an important, and equipping them with the right frameworks is a very important characteristic, in fact, of these companies that we were talking earlier, that are able to change their business process and either make it AI first, or at least introduce AI to an existing business process. They're not doing it's not that the engineer is doing that. I mean, there's a group of people from various disciplines that come together in the enterprise to affect that.
So of the success stories you've been following and tracking around generative AI, the ones that have gone from prototype to production. So are there some popular architectural patterns, I guess RAG. I don't know if you're aware of another thing called graph RAG, which is basically just
Yeah.
a knowledge graph, right? Uh, so are there any common architectural patterns that you're seeing that people are more comfortable with in terms of pulling the trigger of going to production?
I think RAG is definitely ahead of everything else because I think not think. It's because corporations feel most comfortable and is the one that requires the least amount of change and investment on their part.
Has anyone asked you about GraphRag? Is that a thing? Has the term escaped Silicon Valley?
So in our firm, from the beginning, and frankly, it's because of my work dating several decades, from the beginning, we've been developing neurosymbolic systems. Neurosymbolic systems meaning that there are neural networks at some part of the AI system, but there is also a symbolic system, typically using a knowledge graph representation. And as we've seen the development of better graph databases like Neo4j, for example, as well.
Don't forget about Kusu DB. Yeah, open source. Yeah.
Uh, but as we see this, both graph databases, we see graph neural networks. We're seeing, I would say, the notion of graphs, which is a fundamental data structure in computer science, becoming far more important in system architecture.
But this is you. But has anyone brought this up out in the corporate world?
Well, so my point is that in systems that we help build for corporations, we try to educate in that in that way and hopefully adopt it.
So it's more outbound, but there's no inbound request for it.
Not that we know, not that we see. I'll put it this way. I will also say, by the way, on that front, Palantir has done a great job in promoting that knowledge graph-based approach to introducing intelligence to a process. So my point is that we're not alone in making that push. There are other companies, but it's not.
There's still a certain level of education that needs to be done.
I think there's a significant level of education, not rudimentary. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, you and I are both interested in agents. So set aside multi-agents, right? So I guess for our listeners, I actually just wrote a post about multi-agents and the challenges around them. I'll link to it in the episode notes. But
I thought it was a very good piece, by the way.
Yeah. But just agents in general. So first of all, inbound inquiries about agents, are they on the rise?
I would say that AI personnel within a corporation read about them because there's an explosion of literature and there are questions about it. If I were to characterize the state that I see is that we see today individuals working with at least one agent, call it a co-pilot. An agent, the way that is being used today particularly by vendors,
Salesforce.
It's really a misnomer because we really need to be able to distinguish between what is a chatbot, what is a co-pilot, if you will, and what is a true agent. I mean, to me, a true agent needs to not only have a reasoning ability, but needs to have memory. It needs to be able to learn, right? Perceive the environment, reason about it, remember, have a memory of what he has done in the past and in the recent past and in the long past, and finally learn something from that. Whereas most of the agents or most of the systems that are promoted as agents today don't even have those capabilities, right?
So I would say I guess at a high level, the agents right now that people are talking about are what I would call, think about robotic process automation, but a little more sophisticated, right? In the sense that
I'll buy that.
robotic process automation, the task is very prescribed. Whereas
Yeah.
this generation of agents might be able to explore a little bit more, try a
I,
bunch of things, um, and
yeah, I'll buy that.
maybe even
I'll buy that.
reason, because now we have reasoning models. But there's still, you still have to. I would say you still need the human in the loop at some point.
Right. And today, I mean,
Yeah.
today we have, I would say at best, we have single human, single agent. If we were to take your definition, we would like to move to single human, multiple agents before we can go to multiple agents
Among themselves.
dealing, among themselves, right? I think that's far from now. Orchestrate. I mean, I've worked in agent-based systems many years ago, and it's a hard problem. I mean, we have, as you and I discussed in the past. I mean, we do have tooling that, but it's not necessarily AI tooling. It's
No,
coming from other disciplines.
I talked to some of these people building agentic tools, and they would use the word orchestration. And I would say, in the data engineering world, the word orchestration comes with certain expectations. You have a scheduler, you had an executor, you got metadata so that you
Yeah.
can track what's happening. It has to be able to retry,
Right.
right? So there's
You have
and I'm not sure to,
fallback,
yeah, yeah.
all sorts of things. Yes,
I'm not
exactly.
sure. I'm not sure if to what extent they've thought a lot of this through, but uh, so at this point, you would say even the slightly simpler definition of agent I put out there. Have you come across any good examples?
No, no, no. I will just to be brief. I would say that I'm starting to see companies that want to take the. I mean, even 2 days ago, I was watching a webinar by Databricks about agents, right? And I think they want to take what companies are saying and at least play with it. But I have not seen something that I will characterize as a true agent that is working out there and can do things on its own, and the enterprise can rely on it. Again, as I said, there's experimentation now. There is.
But I would imagine, Evangelos, this is a term that a lot of CXOs you talk to are using, agents.
They're hearing a lot about. They want to understand whether to use it. I mean, obviously they are very careful about how they use it because they know that it has implications.
So in closing, I guess it's hard to imagine, but 6 to 12 months from now, obviously there will be developments in the foundation models. So including developments that might help people building agents, agentic foundation models that are multimodal and can use tools, right? So can interact with graphical user interfaces. So where will we be on agents 6 to 12 months? I'll have you back in the podcast before then, so you can change your.
I do not know where we will be with agents in 6 to 12 months, but I want to believe that within the next 6 to 12 months, we will see more generative AI applications, starting with the three primary use cases that I mentioned, namely programming, customer support, intelligent documents, being used by more corporations across more industries maybe even automotive, and getting good results that the CFOs care about, like the improvement in productivity, cutting costs, having higher customer satisfaction, improving loyalty, customer loyalty, right? Things that translate to both revenue generation, revenue increases, cost cutting. Those are the metrics that the CFOs care about, so that we can continue seeing new and additional investment towards the development and deployment of those systems. If that success, if we achieve that success, that type of success, then I think starting to move to agent-driven system or systems that incorporate agents in addition to other behaviors, I think will become easier. And obviously, we need to keep thinking about how we're going to change our business processes so that the adoption will grow. I mean, one of my big concerns is that like we've seen before with other technologies, the adoption will not be as fast as the providers of that technology, be it startups or large corporations, expect. As I said to somebody else, the fact that you hear providers, be it OpenAI or Google or whatever, talking about 500 million users a month, that number in itself doesn't mean much, right? I need to understand how frequently does each person use the tool? What are they using it for? What is the impact of that use? Without having that data, just saying that somebody, I saw somebody coming to my site to use my LLM once a week, that doesn't mean much, because if that person just creates recipes for what they're going to cook that night, it's interesting, but not very interesting to the enterprise.
So this is my final question. Feel free to decline, but as an expert in automotive and mobility, in 6 to 12 months, will we have, Evangelos, self-driving car systems that are camera only?
Oh boy. Look, I
mean, for our listeners out there who are not in San Francisco, we have self-driving cars here operated by Waymo, but they rely on LiDAR, radar, and cameras and multiple levels of redundancy. But certain companies think they can get by with just cameras. So
first of all, I would say that in San Francisco now we have Zoox. Soon we'll have Uber with Mobileye and Volkswagen. So we have some options, and we'll get more.
So the camera only question. Yeah.
Look, a couple of weeks ago, I was in a public forum in LA, Ride.AI, and I wrote about this as well. I don't believe in the camera only system. Okay, I don't even. I'm even skeptical about the end-to-end generative AI system. We have a couple of private companies that are trying that approach, but I think that a camera-only system can work in certain environments that are idealized. They don't get rain, or they don't get fog, or what.
No fog.
But in the general case, if you want to say that I'm producing one platform that I'm going to deploy in a variety of environments that have increased complexity, increased variety of weather variety, and whatever, that requires a multi-sensor approach. I've stated that. I'm not expecting everybody to accept it, but that has been my learned opinion, if you will.
And that seems to be like the mainstream opinion, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have been working in this space for over 10 years. I've written a couple of books about this topic, particularly the AI in the vehicle. And so this is not an opinion just that I'm making. I'm making it up just for the purpose of this podcast. But I say that there is quite a bit of research on my side that has gone into the topic, and what are the difficulties that the single sensor type vehicle will encounter.
By the way, this is absolutely my last question. But given that the criticism against these other sensors are that they're expensive, I imagine the economies of scale are starting to go in the direction that's favorable to these other sensor types, right?
I didn't understand you. Look, the cost of sensors is decreasing.
Yeah,
the cost
exactly.
The cost of sensors is decreasing. That makes it obviously more easier and less expensive for companies to incorporate to have platforms with multiple sensors. I think the big question in my mind is going to be how many sensors of each type do you need in order to operate safely in a variety of environments? Do you need, for example, 6 LiDAR, or can you get by with 2? Do you need 10 cameras, or can you get by with 5? I mean, I'm just making numbers up, but I think that is going to be the critical issue. And I think fleets will be able to get to that issue easily, because if you have, let's take Zoox, for example, or Waymo, they're working with a single type of vehicle, right? That vehicle defines the geometry, right? And it defines what is going to be the sensor stack and obviously the technology stack that you need to have on that vehicle. I think that will make it much easier, as opposed to what we see today in ride-hailing companies, where everybody brings their own vehicle.
Yeah.
Making those operate properly, I think that's going to be a much harder, if not an impossible task. But having a fleet of vehicles that are of the same type and deciding what is the least number of sensors of each type that you need to have on the vehicle in order to operate safely in a variety of environments, and therefore achieve economies of scale, is going to be what will differentiate the successful companies from the less successful ones.
So I'll close with this claim or comment, and then I'll let you have the final word. Well, Evangelos, we already have multi-agent systems. Look at all the Waymos in San Francisco. Each one is an agent, and there's many of them, and they're interacting with each other.
In this event in LA, I said, what we're not hearing about is the tele-operations that exist in each of these companies, and in particular, not only how frequently they intervene, but more importantly, what is the ratio of teleoperators to vehicles per teleoperator.
So this is a closely guarded secret, right? So
exactly, and until those numbers start coming out in the open, we will not be able to clearly assess who has the best and most economical system. Because forgetting everything else, the teleoperators really impact the cost of operating these systems, right? It's one thing to say I have one teleoperator per 40 vehicles, as opposed to I have one teleoperator per 4 vehicles.
So in this case, then, it's a multi-agent system with human in the loop.
With many humans in the loop.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And with that, thank you, Evangelos.
Thank you very much. Thank you.